Today's demonstration is going to show you how to take models in Revit through to 3D Studio Max, into Unity and then into the FULmax. So we're just going to kick off by running Revit 2018. Now we always recommend that you use the Revit that is the native version of the files you're working in. So for example, if you've authored files in Revit 2016, always use Revit 2016 in this workflow. This workflow is backwards compatible all the way down to Revit 2014, so that gives you a lot of different options. But in this case, we're using Revit 2018, so the user interface will be similar in most cases. So we're going to start off with, today we're just going to use the sample architecture project. We're going to let that file open. This video is being recorded on a Surface Pro 3 from Microsoft, so it's not the most powerful hardware, but shows you that it is capable of doing this workflow. So the first thing we want to do is jump into our 3D view. Once the 3D view is open, we want to change a couple of settings. So the first thing is to change the view to realistic. This ensures that any materials that we're working with come through in the process. Things like glass, wall textures, brick, any additional textures that you've loaded into your project. If you stick to flat shaded, you'll just get the standard flat shaded colours come through. The other setting to check is your detail level. Now we recommend working with medium. The reason for this is it removes a lot of fillets from things like steel beams that aren't required for visualizations, making it a lot lighter to run. If you do, however, want really fine-grained detail, then stick it on to fine, but this will increase the processing time. So we're going to stick with medium. Now that we've got our textures in the realistic format, we're running at medium, we're going to go up to File, Export, and FBX. And this starts the process. So we're going to choose where to save them. In this case, we've got a folder here called Revit Demo. We're just going to call this 3D House. And the file type, we always recommend going with the latest version. So FBX files. If you've got this FBX 2015 and previous, you just want to change to FBX files. The important thing here is to tick Use LOD. The reason for this is it looks at your level of detail setting, so in this case we've set it to medium. Otherwise it exports absolutely everything with a model, which will take ages to view. So this will take a few seconds depending on your machine and the size of the model, and it will export out an FBX file. So we can now come out of Revit and we're going to open 3ds Max. Depending on your computer's speed, 3ds Max can open in a few seconds. Just wait until you've got the full view open with all of your selection tree. Once it's at this stage, we can go up to File, and then we're going to go to Reference and Manage Links. So that's File, Reference, Manage Links. And it opens this folder here. So before we do anything further, let's go and check our presets. So we click on the Presets tab, and we can see here the Revit or FBX. Now we've got a couple of different settings here. Combined by Revit material makes all of the objects that are using the same materials combined into a single object, which can be quite useful if you're only wanting to change materials once or if you're wanting to go in and work on some photorealism. Combined by Revit category will group things into walls, doors, furniture, however you've categorized them within Revit. Combined by Revit family type can be useful if you're wanting to bring all the chairs from a specific family, all the tables from another, and bring them together. So just choose the option that you require. We highly recommend you do not use Autodesk Revit as one object. What that will do is it will bring all of the objects in your Revit model and crush them into a single Goliath model. And this you'll find will be very difficult to work with. It will also change how textures are referenced, so we highly recommend do not use as one object. And the setting that we most commonly use is do not combine entities. This means that if we want to go in and change any part of the model whilst we're in Unity, we can. So it's up to you which one you choose. For today, because I'm on a low powered machine, I'm going to choose combine by Revit material. Now in here, if we click modify, we can see the settings, and I recommend you have these settings as well. So we have lights ticked, and that means that any light fixtures will come through with a position for the light bulb. With that not ticked, you'll find that the lights just won't appear. We recommend unticking the other three items because you're not needing the helper at origin, you're needing daylight system or cameras. The curved object details, by default this is set to 10. we highly recommend bring this down to 5. This is to reduce the amount of polygons for things like pipes and railings, which will massively slow down any visualization. We also recommend ticking Auto Smooth Adjacent Faces. This just helps out smooth out the appearance of rough lines. So, tick in Lights, Curved Object Detail at 5, and a tick in Smooth Adjacent Faces. And that's the same settings for each of these. So we're just going to hit Save. So you can see by going into any of these and hitting Modify, you can then see your settings. And feel free to play with these settings, but this is what we'd recommend. So we now go back to our Attach tab, click on File, and we'll go and find that file that we found earlier. So in this case, it's in My Documents. Revit demo, and there's our 3D house. And we're just going to hit Open. We see the preset that we've chosen, in this case combined by Revit material, and we're just going to click Attach this file. You don't need to worry about any of these other settings. You'll see, depending on your computer's speed, this can take a few seconds to a few minutes. Again, depends on the size of the model. This was recorded on a Surface Pro 3, so not the most powerful piece of hardware, but it's perfectly usable for this workflow. Now that the model's imported, there's one last step we have to do with this Manage Links. We're going to go to Files tab, and we're going to click Bind. And all that's going to do is break any relationship back to the original Revit model. Just hit Proceed with Bind. And that's a useful step, especially if you're working with linked models. We'll just close this down, and now you can see the model has come in. What you can see, however, is some of the textures have not, and this is because Autodesk encrypts their own textures, and this is why we use the UMC tool from 3D Studio NL. So, go to Tools, UMC, or wherever you've chosen to store it, and up comes the Universal Material Converter. So we're going to convert the whole scene, we're going to convert it to standard scan line. We don't tick the first box, we tick the second, and the reason we make instances from duplicate materials is we might want to change things on a item by item basis. So if we've brought in just black chairs, for example, we want to change some to blue, some to red, we can go in and change those settings later. We're going to have the next option, Skip Existing Render Engine Materials, unticked, and we're going to tick Converting Compatible Materials to a Default Material. This just means if it can't find a material file, it won't error out, it will just convert it to a default material that we will have to deal with later. The ones we do want to tick is VR mode, and the reason we do this is it will then bake the correct texture with the correct diffuse colour so that it looks correct when it comes through into Unity. Down here, the bake procedural textures should be ticked, and the resolution is 512 would be more than adequate. The higher this number, the better the quality the textures in the FULmax. However, 512 is pretty optimal. We're then going to come down. All of these settings can remain the same, and we're just going to click Convert to Standard. Again, depending on the size of the model, this could take a few seconds. And here we say Conversion Finished. We hit OK, that's fine. Now if we come back to our main window, we can now see the textures have come through. This is now ready to export to Unity. To do that, we're going to go File, Export, and Export. So that's File, Export, Export. Clicking on the export, we then choose where we want to put it. So again, we're going to put this into the Revit demo folder that we created earlier. And we're going to click 3D House, but we're then going to add after it 3DS. The reason for this is you need to know your edited file versus the original when you're importing to Unity. So we're just going to hit Save. This will bring up another dialog window. Now these settings will be in the attached documentation, but under Geometry you do not need to change anything. Under Animation, untick Animation. In Cameras, untick Cameras. In Lights, untick Lights. Now this might seem a bit strange, but that's just telling Unity that you're not going to have any of the light cones that Revit would automatically generate. Otherwise what you would find is your model is very washed out. It will still bring the lights through in the correct location, that will just not enable any of them in the export. Audio you can skip, and embed media, we recommend you ticking embed media. This means all the textures are wrapped up inside the FBX model and will come across as one. And then units, you don't need to change because your scale factor is set to automatic. Whether it's come in from inches, millimetres, centimetres, as long as your scale factor is 1.0, then automatic can remain ticked. Axis conversion, y-axis up should be your default, and then nothing needs to be changed under UI, and then under FBX file format we recommend picking the latest FBX version, in this case 2018. And that's all the settings that need to be done. So we hit OK, that will then go out and process that FBX model ready for viewing in Unity. That's the step we're going to do now. So we're going to go open Unity. In this case we're demonstrating with 2018, but is also compatible in 2017. And in here we're going to create ourselves a new project. So we're going to choose our location for the project, in this case our Revit demo folder, and we're going to call it something 3D house. Obviously keep your naming conventions to whatever you use internally. We recommend keeping a naming convention that you'll be able to understand and use later. And then we're just going to hit create project. Now Unity will take a few seconds to load up the first time it's being used, but what you'll then find is the standard Unity interface. Now that Unity is opened, you may see a slightly different screen setup to this. What we recommend for ease of use is going to a layout and going 2x3, which will give you this layout of windows. And then in the project settings you may find you have two columns. What again we recommend is one column layout. So just click this down arrow with 3 lines and go one column layout. And this gives us our interface. On the left hand side we have our scene view. Underneath that we have our game view. To the right we have our hierarchy, and this is all of the objects found within the scene. We then have our project view, which is our folder, and this is where we're going to be putting on our models and our materials. And then on the right hand side we've got our lighting or inspector windows, and this allows us to interrogate objects. At the bottom we have a console. For this tutorial this isn't required, so don't worry about it. So the first thing we're going to do is make ourselves some folders to put things in. So in assets we're going to right click, go create and folder. We're going to call this models. Then we're going to right click on assets again, create another folder called textures. And the last one we're going to create, right click on assets, create materials. The reason for this is just to keep ourselves organized and keep everything nice and tidy. So what we're going to do now is right click on the models folder and go import new asset. We then go and locate our Revit demo, and in this one we're going to choose the one which has 3DS afterwards, so this is the model that's being processed, and we're going to click import. Again, depending on the size of the model, this could take a few seconds to a few minutes. Now you'll see that the model has imported. We can drag it up. We can see the model here at the moment. If we were to take this model now, click and drag into the hierarchy, we'll see the model come up in the scene view. We'll see it come up in the game based on where the main camera is. And a nice trick, if you get lost at any point, click on the model, in this case 3D house, hover over the window and press F on your keyboard, and that will zoom to extents so you can see the whole model. Right click the mouse button to spin and rotate the window, middle scroll wheel to zoom in and out. Now at this point in time it doesn't look much like our model, so what we're going to do is come back to our 3D house in our project window, click on here, and in the inspector we come across to materials. By clicking on materials we can drag the window down here to hide it if we so wish. We're going to make sure we extract our textures, so this is the first step. So click on 3D house, click materials and click extract textures. It's now going to ask you where do you want to save your textures. In this case I'm going to go back to my assets folder, and here is the folder we created earlier called textures. We're going to go select. Once we selected this will now extract all of the JPEGs and PNGs that have been embedded into the model. Out they come. Then after a couple of seconds you'll see that it's finished processing. Now you see that the model materials have been applied to the house in the window, but we can't edit them yet, so we need to come back to our inspector on the right, If you've lost it, click on 3D House, click on Materials, and now we're going to go Extract Materials. And this will now take all of those textures and bind them back into the materials that we need. Again, we're going to come back to our Assets folder, and we're going to choose Materials this time. By selecting the Materials folder, this will now take all of these materials that currently say None and turn them into a material that we can adjust and use. Again, depending on the size of your model and the speed of your machine, this could take a few seconds to a few minutes. Again, this video was recorded on a Microsoft Surface Pro 3, so not the fastest or most powerful bit of hardware, but perfectly functional. So, after that has completed, you'll be able to see all of these materials mapped in here. We can click on any of these to get more information. Now, what I find is that things like windows come in too clear. So we might want to go in and change that material. So if we click on a window, we'll see that we've got this glass shader. We can open this, and this is now where you can play around with your model until your heart's content. But for example, I can make that glass a lot darker. I think that's about right, and I like my glass to have a dark green tint. All up to you how you change things. So once you're happy with all your textures and lighting within the model, what we do is we're going to bring in the FULmax plugin. So on Assets, we're going to right click, we're going to go to Import Package, Custom Package. Now you need to find the FULmax plugin. Most of the time this will be found in your C drive in the FULmax folder, and you just use the one with the latest date. By double clicking on it, you then get this Import Unity Package folder, and we just hit Import at the bottom. That's going to bring in all of the required elements for the FULmax system. Now that the FULmax plugin has been imported, we need to bring it into our scene. So we're going to come back to the project folder, open up the FULmax one, and look in prefabs. Under prefabs, we have FULmax. All we're going to do is drag and drop this into our hierarchy, and we now see this object here and a preview down at the bottom of Game. And this is our camera. We can choose where we want to position this. So if we view from above, we can grab, move it around. And I'm going to start this simulation in the kitchen. And again, that feels a little low, so we'll bring it up to about head height. Now that that is done, and we're happy with the start position, we go FULmax, Publish to FULmax. As easy as that. This will now take your scene. At this point, the scene is named Sample Scene. You can rename that to whatever you want, and this will process out the model files ready for viewing in the FULmax cube. Again, depending on the size of your models, this could take a few seconds to a few minutes. Once it's exported the model, you'll see you get a folder open, and it's as simple as running your sample scene. Or if you named your scene something else, you see the icon that says Run and then Sample Scene. Now if you run this on a normal PC, in the case of, well, here we're on a tablet, you'll get this sort of view where we have the left, the rear, the right and the roof screens all on one screen. So you can test this, you don't have to be in a FULmax. If you're running in a FULmax, however, you just put that file onto a USB stick, take this entire folder here onto your USB stick and put it onto the FULmax, and that is how you build for FULmax.